Tony Randall wasn't the kind of Hollywood star who chased headlines or engineered scandals. In an industry built on chaos, spectacle, and carefully crafted publicity stunts, Randall was a rare breed. With his elegant charm, razor-sharp wit, and meticulous composure, he projected an image of sophistication that set him apart from most television comedians of his era. From the 1950s through the early 2000s, Randall became a familiar face to audiences across America. He appeared on countless talk shows, performed in Broadway productions, starred in comedic films, and made himself a staple of network television. But his most defining moment came in 1970, when ABC premiered The Odd Couple. As Felix Unger, the neurotic, hyper-organized foil to Jack Klugman's carefree, messy Oscar Madison, Randall found the role that would etch his name permanently into television history. To viewers, Felix Unger wasn't a character, it was Tony Randall. The obsessive neatness, the intellectual sharpness, the theatrical frustration, it all felt real. People saw Randall on screen and believed they understood the man behind the performance. And that was exactly what Randall wanted them to believe. Privately, however, Randall was a fortress. He guarded his personal life fiercely, avoided tabloid attention, and maintained an image so pristine that it seemed untouched by Hollywood drama. There were no public feuds, no messy divorces splashed across headlines, no drunken tirades caught on tape. To the outside world, Randall was calm, composed, and above the fray, which is why what happened later stunned fans. After The Odd Couple ended in 1975, Randall's career moved forward steadily. He continued acting, producing, and guest starring on television. But there was one figure from The Odd Couple world who seemed to vanish from his orbit entirely: Brett Somers. Somers, a sharp-tongued actress, beloved for her no-filter humor on Match Game, and her recurring role as Oscar Madison's ex-wife Blanche on The Odd Couple, had been deeply woven into Randall's professional and personal circle. For years, they appeared together in interviews, talk shows, and charity events. Then suddenly she was gone. No reunions, no interviews, not even a passing reference. At first, people assumed it was nothing unusual. Hollywood friendships often faded. But as time passed and Randall's silence deepened, whispers began to spread. Something had happened. Something serious. For a man who rarely held grudges, Randall's total erasure of Somers from his story meant only one thing. This wasn't casual distance. It was deliberate. And behind his carefully controlled exterior, there was a wound he never wanted to revisit. On-screen harmony, off-screen complexity. When The Odd Couple premiered, it quickly became one of the most celebrated sitcoms of the 1970s. Audiences adored the chemistry between Tony Randall and Jack Klugman. Felix Unger's meticulous order clashing with Oscar Madison's unapologetic chaos became a formula for comedic gold. Viewers assumed the camaraderie they saw on screen reflected real-life friendships behind the cameras. And for a while it did. Randall and Klugman respected each other deeply and built a working relationship grounded in trust and admiration. But another key figure in that world was Brett Somers. Somers wasn't just Klugman's real-life wife. She was a force of nature in her own right. With her biting wit, gravelly voice, and bold personality, she became a fixture of 1970s television. Her recurring appearances as Blanche Madison brought her into the heart of The Odd Couple's universe, and her unfiltered persona made her a fan favorite on Match Game. Randall and Somers shared countless public appearances, talk show panels, and comedy sketches. Their dynamic became part of their charm. Somers teased Randall relentlessly for his uptight tendencies, while he responded with subtle eye rolls and dry one-liners that had audiences roaring with laughter. To fans, it was harmless fun, but behind the scenes, the dynamic was growing more complicated. Crew members later recalled noticing subtle changes. Randall began skipping rap parties, leaving set events early, and avoiding casual conversations with Somers. At first, these shifts were barely noticeable, small enough to ignore. But over time, the distance between them became undeniable. Part of the problem was Somers' unique position. As Klugman's wife, she had access to private moments, inside jokes, and behind-the-scenes discussions. That closeness blurred the line between professional relationships and personal boundaries. And when those boundaries blurred too far, things became strained. Unlike Randall, Summers thrived on chaos. Where he valued privacy and restraint, she lived for unfiltered honesty. Her humor was sharp, sometimes cutting, and while audiences adored her candor, insiders noticed Randall's discomfort when her jokes veered too personal. For years, Randall kept his frustrations private, maintaining his polished image and refusing to let tensions spill into public view. But everything changed one night, an infamous evening whispered about for decades, but rarely discussed openly. The roast that shattered everything in 1970s. Hollywood, the Friars Club roast were legendary. Brutal, unfiltered, and often cruel, these events celebrated stars by mercilessly tearing them down in front of their peers. Nothing was sacred, no topic was off limits. For Tony Randall, one roast in particular would mark a turning point. The event was designed to honor the success of The Odd Couple. Randall arrived expecting lighthearted jabs about Felix Unger's quirks and his famously meticulous personality. He likely braced himself for playful teasing about his fastidiousness, his intellectual tendencies, and his obsession with control. Then Brett Somers took the stage. Somers was known for her fearless wit and whiskey-soaked voice, and the crowd prepared for fireworks. But what followed went far beyond the usual roast material. She began with anecdotes from The Odd Couple set, but instead of gentle humor, she dove straight into Randall's deepest insecurities. She mocked his perfectionism, his endless rehearsals, and his need to control every detail. But then she went further. According to those who were there, Somers shifted from playful teasing into exposing private struggles Randall had worked hard to keep hidden. She joked about his self-doubt, his tendency to spiral when a scene didn't land, even hinting at personal matters Randall had shared in confidence. The audience erupted with laughter, but Randall didn't. Those seated near him later described his expression as frozen, his usual charm replaced by silent disbelief. Some claimed he excused himself before the roast ended. Others insist he stayed seated, composed on the surface but unraveling inside. For a man who valued dignity above all else, having his private life turned into a public punchline felt like humiliation. That night, Randall made a decision that would define the rest of their relationship. Brett Somers was no longer part of his life. It wasn't an outburst of anger. It wasn't revenge. It was colder than that. It was silence. Randall's silent retaliation. After the roast, Tony Randall did what he always did best. He maintained his composure. There was no screaming match, no public feud, no media scandal. Outwardly, nothing seemed amiss. Behind the scenes, everything changed. Somers, once a constant presence in Randall's professional circle, vanished from his life entirely. He quietly declined invitations to events where she'd be present. He avoided interviews that involved her name. He turned down reunion specials that might force them into the same room. For the public, the separation was invisible at first, but within the industry, it was unmistakable. Randall had shut the door, and he wasn't opening it again. This wasn't forgiveness, it was control. Randall, ever protective of his image, understood the power of omission. By refusing to acknowledge Somers in any way, no comments, no rebuttals, no anecdotes, he effectively erased her from his narrative. The silence itself became a statement. Meanwhile, Somers continued speaking openly about their time together. She joked about Randall in interviews and referenced their shared history on Match Game. But Randall never responded, never played along, never offered so much as a passing memory. To him, she was gone. Over the years, fans began to notice. Why weren't Randall and Somers included in nostalgic reunions? Why were there no interviews celebrating their dynamic? Why, in every retrospective, did Randall carefully sidestep mentioning her at all? Because the omission wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. What insiders revealed. Tony Randall never publicly explained the rift, but friends and colleagues slowly pieced the story together. The roast may have been the breaking point, they said, but the foundation of tension had been building for years. Somers' comedic style, sharp, fearless, and boundary-pushing, clashed directly with Randall's obsession with control. What she saw as harmless fun, he saw as exposure. She turned private quirks into public punchlines, and for Randall, each joke chipped away at the carefully constructed image he worked tirelessly to maintain. One close friend later revealed that Randall confided, "She made my private life feel like a performance." For a man who built his career on choosing exactly how much of himself to reveal, that loss of control felt like betrayal. Colleagues recalled how Randall slowly withdrew from Summers over time. He spoke less during group dinners, shortened rehearsal chats, and created subtle distance on set. It wasn't dramatic, but it was intentional. For years, he tolerated the discomfort, perhaps out of professionalism, perhaps out of loyalty to Klugman, his co-star and Summers' husband. But after the roast, there was no turning back. Interestingly, Jack Klugman never publicly addressed the fallout. Some believe he avoided the topic to keep the peace. Others say his silence was a quiet acknowledgement of just how deep the wound went. By the time fans noticed Summers' absence from tributes and reunions, insiders had long accepted the truth. Randall had made a permanent decision, and once Tony Randall closed a door, he never reopened it. The final curtain. By the early 2000s, the world had changed, and so had Tony Randall. The relentless hustle of show business had slowed, but Randall remained a figure of timeless charm, a living relic of an era when television legends were made, not manufactured. After decades of playing fast-talking neurotics and refined intellectuals, Tony had grown into his elder statesman role with grace. But beneath the polished exterior, there was still a man full of contradictions. In 1995, at the age of 75, Tony did something that sent shockwaves through Hollywood gossip columns. He married Heather Harlan, a 24-year-old intern at the National Actors Theater. The media erupted with headlines, talk shows buzzed with speculation, and comedians sharpened their punchlines. Some called him reckless, others romantic, but Tony, ever the contrarian, refused to apologize. "Love," he said in an interview, "isn't measured in years. It's measured in connection." Behind closed doors, Tony seemed happier than he'd been in decades. Friends recalled how Heather brought a kind of quiet stability to his life, something he never quite had during his tumultuous marriage with Brett Summers. With Heather, there were no roasts, no public scandals, no biting remarks traded across talk shows. Just a man in his twilight years savoring a new kind of peace. Then in 1997, at the age of 77, Tony became a father for the first time. To many, it was shocking. To Tony, it was a renaissance. He poured his energy into parenting the way he once poured it into rehearsals, scripts, and performances. Friends would often see him strolling through Central Park with a stroller, beaming with a kind of joy that had eluded him for decades. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. In 2003, Tony underwent a routine procedure for pneumonia, but suffered unexpected complications. His health began to decline rapidly. In public, he kept up appearances, still attending theater events and giving witty interviews. But those closest to him noticed the change. Behind the sharp suits and perfectly rehearsed smiles, Tony was tired. By 2004, his condition had worsened. Close friends like Jack Klugman, his former co-star and longtime friend, would sit by his bedside, reminiscing about their days filming The Odd Couple. They'd laugh about forgotten bloopers, studio politics, and the roaring success of a show that had cemented their legacies forever. "I always thought we'd be the last two standing," Jack later confessed. But Tony was always larger than life. You forget he was human too. On May 17, 2004, Tony Randall passed away at the age of 84. Heather, holding their young children close, described his final moments as peaceful. "He wasn't afraid," she said softly in an interview months later. Tony had lived 1,000 lives in one lifetime. He had no regrets. Hollywood mourned the loss of one of its finest craftsmen. Tributes poured in from across the industry, from actors who grew up watching him, to directors who admired his precision, to fans who felt like they'd known him personally through his work. Yet for many, Tony's story wasn't just about fame or career milestones. It was about complexity. A man who could make millions laugh on screen while privately wrestling with loneliness. A man who faced public scrutiny and private heartbreak, but never stopped reinventing himself. A man who, despite his flaws, remained unapologetically authentic. As the curtains closed on Tony Randall's life, one thing became clear. He wasn't just a television star. He was a survivor of Hollywood's ever-shifting tides. A reminder that behind every polished persona is a complicated human being. And somewhere, perhaps, Brett Somers was raising a glass, smirking that mischievous smirk she was known for, and saying exactly what everyone who knew Tony probably thought. Typical Tony.